welcome to yet another of our Lunch and Learns. My colleague Namdi will be taking us through some of the security threats which you can be aware of and should be aware of in today's online cloud-based world. Some of the threats that you should be looking out for, and some of the things and techniques and toolings that we can use to mitigate them, fight against them, and how HSO can help you. So yeah, put any questions you have in the chat, and without further ado, I'll pass over to my colleague Namdi.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everyone. I'm Namdi Opara. I'm a security consultant with HSO. Responsibilities are designing and deploying security architectures across HSO customers. So for today, I'll be taking you through a few Microsoft security solutions, which may be beneficial to your business, irrespective of the industry. Thank you. So I'll start off with the agenda. I'll firstly take you through an introduction. Essentially, I'll be giving you a brief understanding of cyber attacks. I'll then move forward with the cybersecurity approach, some of the HSO security solutions, and what we can do for you as HSO based on what we are going to expose you to today. So I'll make a start with introducing the concept of cyber attacks, and hopefully that lays a good groundwork. So what is a cyber attack? A cyber attack, in essence, is a series of actions initiated by threat actors to gain access to unauthorized data or cause loss of availability to systems. This effectively gets you to see that cyber attacks are not only referred to as cyber attacks when they are successful, but the actions in itself is classified as a cyber attack, successful or not. So if you look at the image to the left of the screen, this shows some of these actions: delivery of malware, spam, botnets, network intrusions, and a whole lot of delivery mechanisms which threat actors are known to use. And very often, these attacks are delivered as defined by the cyber kill chain model. When you review past cyber attacks, the trajectory most times is usually very similar. And if you take a look at the attack trajectory box to the screen, that's effectively the cyber kill chain. So in the first instance, the attacker executes reconnaissance activities, and this phase enables the attacker gain as much information as possible about the business. For instance, potential email addresses, public URLs, open ports, and general artifacts that identify a business. With that, they then proceed to weaponize gathered data and deliver these payloads against vulnerabilities in the target system. And these vulnerabilities could be untrained staff, open ports, misconfigurations, and so on. So generally, this is how an attacker gains access to a system without intentional authorization. So with this in mind, what's quite clear is this: for a cyber attack to be successful, there must be one or more vulnerabilities in the system. But with that said, that brings us to the fundamentals for today, which is how do we protect businesses from cyber attacks? So there are key security control indicators that determine the likelihood of a cyber attack against a business being successful or not. As shown on the screen, in no particular order, we have the network security control, the identity security controls, privileged access practices, data protection, login and threat detection, incident response, and so on. So a lot of customers tend to ask questions around which of these control areas is most important to a business, or at least where do businesses need to spend most of the time or effort. Generally going by what we've seen over the years, the reality is any of these control areas could put your business at risk if neglected. And there's always a trade-off in terms of what you lose versus what you gain if you choose to favor a security control over another. And I'll give a good example of this is if you think of your logging practice as a business, oftentimes a lot of businesses do not pay as much attention to event logging. And this creates a huge challenge in cases of incident response where you're brought in as a consultant to assist with cyber recovery operations. Typically, when you are brought into a cyber attack scenario, the first point of reference is usually the system logs. And where these do not exist, that could effectively mean extended downtime for the business. And in a lot of cases, damage to business reputation, depending on the impact of the cyber breach. So it's safe to say that all security control domains are relevant. Again, another good way to baseline this is if you look into compliance frameworks like MCSB, CIS, NIST, and so on, the set of controls that certify your IT estate as security compliant, it must definitely cut across all of these areas without any omissions. Okay, I'll move forward. So going through all of the security control domains listed could take hours to deliver. So for the purpose of this session, the focus is on the highlighted control areas, which is security posture management, logging and monitoring, and endpoint security management, and how Microsoft security tools meet the expectations of businesses. So without further ado, security posture management is critical in the sense that it gives security specialists a very quick insight into vulnerable areas within a business. Imagine a scenario where you're brought into a business for a 10-day engagement, five, it could be whatever, to conduct a quick but thorough risk assessment and provide valuable insights to the customer. And this could be a customer with an IT estate that spans across hundreds of IaaS and PaaS resources and so on. So this could be challenging without the right tool sets. Microsoft Defender for Cloud is the forefront cloud tool for managing your asset security posture as a business. Hopefully, most of us are familiar with the Defender for Cloud product. So HSO has deployed the Defender for Cloud solutions across multiple customers, and the feedback has been very positive, especially with businesses that have a multi-cloud environment and the need to assess the security status of all of these independent environments from a single pane of glass. So a lot of customers have subscriptions or data dependencies across AWS, GCP, Azure cloud environments, and you could think of these as being necessitated by supply chain management network models. And the reality is you need to continuously assess these connections into your environment from potential risks. So Microsoft Defender for Cloud is a very, very, very good tool for this specific use case, and we have delivered a lot of these. Thinking of if you also think about the tool you need to use to assess security postures across businesses, you need to think of the overhead, the setup overhead, and by setup overhead I mean the complexity in installing the necessary tools that are required. So with Defender for Cloud, it's very minimal because the scans, those initial vulnerability scans, are agentless except there is a need to onboard servers, which then gets you into the area of having to use the Azure Arc. But for the scans, it's completely agentless, so you don't need to be worried about lightweight or lightweight or resources that could impact your processors, the processors of your machines. So it's completely agentless. So that said, another interesting feature of Defender for Cloud is the attack path analysis, which models traffic on your network to identify potential risks before you implement changes to your environment. So the way it works is it scans your cloud security graph, yep, and exposes exploitable paths that attackers might be able to use to breach your environment. And then it produces a flowchart or graphical diagram to show that possible data flow. So imagine looking at a graphical illustration that shows you the trajectory of an indicator of compromise from the cloud entry point all the way to how it settles on a user's machine. So that's quite crucial if when you look at it from vulnerability assessment and high-level security operations. Uh, Defender for Cloud also enables you to drive security improvements through your organization by assigning tasks to resource owners and tracking the progress of these tasks, and that helps you align your security state with your security policy. So it's worth mentioning that the Defender for Cloud Security Posture Management is a free feature. So this is automatically enabled when you deploy the solution across your subscriptions. So for that specific vulnerability assessment and production of reports, the recommendations, the secure score visualizations, that's not chargeable. So it's worth mentioning. I'll move forward to the next slide. So I've dropped the link to the Defender for Cloud page. Please do spend some time on here going through the functionalities. There are multiple functionalities which we are unable to cover on this session, but and I'm quite sure these are going to be very beneficial to your business. The next domain is the area of logging and monitoring. So this specific area requires a lot of emphasis based on what we've seen over time. Like I mentioned earlier on, a lot of businesses do not have the right login architecture. So as a business, you need to define a structure on what you intend to log. A lot of times you find out that businesses have a lot of unusable logs or do not have logs at all. So when defining your login architecture, you need to think of what would be useful to me in the event of a cyber breach. Now that points to things like firewalls, network security groups, administrative activities, web security systems, if you have any in-house, endpoint logs. So all of these are all critical detection points for a cyber breach. Yeah, so it's also recommended that you work very closely with your security operations team to identify what logs are relevant. A lot of businesses we don't businesses do not need to have the same logs. So you tend to look at logs from the trajectory of how the attackers could compromise, and the impact of a compromise of that data should determine how well you log. Because I mean, if you think about it, logging has budget limitations as well. So you need to be sure that you're logging the right or relevant data that's useful to your business in the event of a cyber breach. Now, moving to what we have on the screen. So in terms of the SIEM, Microsoft Sentinel is the security solution for security information and event management. Now, this is exceptionally beneficial when you have security analysts or trained security personnel in-house owning the tools. Over the years, there have been massive improvements in detection algorithms. And by detection algorithms, I mean the MITRE ATT&CK framework, correlation rules, use cases, and generally the sequence of that sequence of events that triggers an incident in your SIEM. So Sentinel integrates seamlessly with Defender for Cloud, Defender for Endpoints, Defender for Cloud Apps, and the overall Microsoft Defender suite. So if you've got an E5 license and you have access to a lot of these back-end tools, Sentinel does come in handy. It's also worth mentioning that Sentinel ingests a lot of these logs for free. Likes of Azure AD, Defender for Endpoints, a lot of these logs come into Sentinel for free. So over to the features. One of the features of Sentinel that will be certainly beneficial to most customers is the user entity behavior and analytics engine. So we would all agree that identifying insider risks and advanced persistent threats is quite time consuming and labor intensive, as you have to sift through a lot of alerts, connect dots, and perform active threat huntings, and sometimes with minimal returns. So the UEBA service, which is the user entity and behavior analytics service built into Sentinel, eliminates a lot of these uncertainties and delivers high fidelity alerts based on its baseline of your environment. So I'm sure you may be wondering how that works. So the way it works is over time, as you connect your log or data connectors into Sentinel, it builds a baseline or a behavioral profile baseline for all the organizational entities. And by entities, I mean IP addresses, access controls, devices, and so on. So the behavior service engine of Sentinel has access to your Active Directory systems. So it's essentially able to tell what users belong to what divisions in the business. So if you've defined these elements on AD. So for instance, if you're going to Active Directory, you need to define that a user belongs to. It could be the finance department or the IT department, and Sentinel is able to pull that sort of behavior from AD. But if it doesn't exist, then it becomes a bit tricky to baseline that user. It then has to rely on the nature of events that have been occurring over time, rather than the policy defined for that specific user. So all of these, in addition to the baseline profile, build sort of an anomaly detection engine that's triggered when there's a suspicious activity. So I've popped a link in the next slide to Microsoft documentation on this feature. So another key feature with Sentinel is the use of watch lists. So the watch list it's not a new feature. It's been there, but it's a very vital feature. It enables you to correlate data from other sources within Sentinel. So for instance, you might decide to create a watch list that targets high value assets, could be VIPs, could be terminated employees, and so on. So what it does is whenever there's an incident and you are able to gather some threat intelligence from any of your threat intelligence feeds, you could import that gathered threat intelligence data to target the interactions with the watch list values. So basically, you could be importing a spreadsheet of IP addresses, loads of indicators from threat intelligence sites, and baselining them against those values which you've defined in the watch list. So that's a very vital one, because on the spot, it's able to get you to a point where you can give a verdict on a true positive or a false positive determination. So lastly, on Sentinel is the content hub feature. This is another very, very vital one in addition to all of the correlation rules which we have on the tool. So the content hub feature enables you build out of the box solutions for a wide range of products. Doesn't matter what product it is, it could be SAP, Cisco Umbrella, Checkpoint, abnormal email solutions, and so on. The Sentinel detection system keys into these tools and automatically creates analytics use cases for different products from its knowledge base. So Palo Alto firewalls, whatever product it is, it doesn't have to be a Microsoft product. So Sentinel gets a connector that keys into those tools and builds some analytics behind them to provide relevant context for you in the case of security operations. So, like I said, there's a link put in the next place for in the next slide for you to go through. Please do go through this. It does give you a whole lot more context than time would permit me to give on this session. So, last but not least for this session is the endpoint security solution known as Microsoft Defender for Endpoints. I'm sure a lot of us probably use Microsoft Defender for Endpoints. So Microsoft Defender for Endpoints is an enterprise-grade endpoint security platform that's designed to help enterprise networks prevent, detect, and in most cases, investigate and respond to incidents. So this is the tool which Microsoft has designed to help protect businesses from ransomware payloads, wipers, and so on. As we all know, ransomware is a type of malware which threat actors deploy to your machines or endpoints to prevent you from accessing your files by essentially encrypting them, unless you're able to meet their demands. And in most cases, they send you the decryption keys, depending on the cryptographic method used by the payload, if it's asymmetric or symmetric encryption. So for a ransomware to be executed successfully, what's clear is that it needs to make its way to a machine, either by direct program execution, which is when a sysadmin executes a normal .exe program, or when anyone here could execute an .exe program. So that could be a ransomware which you're deploying to your machine, or by binary planting. So binary planting is a scenario where the malicious code is placed in a file system that manipulates a vulnerable program. So it could be cases of system calls, because when you load your programs, it does interact with the DLL that's in the operating system memory. So a lot of programs have vulnerabilities that are exploited by malwares. That's the point around binary planting. So these are, if you think about this from a high level, these are the fundamentals of a ransomware or malware execution. It gets much bigger than this when you start to think about the method of delivery, which may have been drive-by URLs, email attachments, malicious links, obfuscated files, and so on. But generally, it's definitely always traced back to a security control breakdown at some point. So to deal with this sort of scenarios, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint was introduced by Microsoft. So there are two plans to Defender for Endpoints. We have the Defender for Endpoint Plan 1 and Defender for Endpoint Plan 2. As you can see to the right of the screen, they both share similarities in terms of what they both offer. But Plan 2 is generally equipped with more detection and response capabilities. So to the top right of the screen, we've got Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Plan 1 capabilities. That's the color codes in green. Those are the features you get off a Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Plan 1. And what you've got below is Plan 2. So to go into these in a bit more detail, to start to get you to see the relevance in relation to a ransomware or a malware attack. So with Defender for Plan 1, you get the attack surface reduction, the next generation protection, centralized configuration administration, APIs and integration, whereas with the Defender for Endpoint Plan 2, you have all of these which I've mentioned, which is generally encompassing the entire Defender for Plan 1 with additional features like core Defender vulnerability management, endpoint detection and response, which is quite critical, automated investigation and response, behavioral containment and blocking, and the Microsoft Threat Experts. So generally, in the context of malware, the attack, if you think about the stages of the relevance of the Defender for Endpoint 2, in the context of a malware, the attack surface reduction feature sits at the edge, which is I've ordered the basically the order in the slide is the order of its action on a potential malware that hits an endpoint. So the attack surface reduction feature sits at the edge and provides the first line of defense by ensuring that all security settings on the endpoint are configured correctly. So a lot of these settings it looks out for are settings like network protection, web protection, and so on. So it's a setting that you basically need to key into in your from the Defender console. And then what it does really is ensuring that every other tool on the machine from a network point of view, from a web point of view, is configured correctly. Are the right URLs blocked? Are the right IPs blocked? So at this point, it's not particularly interfacing with a malware that may come into the system. But this is quite relevant to be able to ensure that a formidable defense is in place in the event of a cyber breach. So we tend to see that as the first pillar in that protection algorithm. The next pillar of protection is the next generation feature, which is then designed to catch emerging threats. So this is closer to the function you need from an endpoint protection tool. So this is what sits on top of the attack surface reduction. So this is applicable to both plans up until this point. So both plans have the attack surface reduction and the next generation protection. But moving on to the third pillar of protection, which is the endpoint detection and response capabilities, it's the endpoint plan 2 then starts to get segregated from the Microsoft Defender for Endpoints plan 1. So the third pillar is the endpoint detection and response capability, which now goes a step further to detect, investigate, and respond to advanced threats that make it past the first two pillars. So in my experience, this is where it starts to get very interesting because the EDR does a lot of the telemetry analysis and all of that on an endpoint. So it's always advised that customers go with Microsoft Defender for Endpoints Plan 2. And then again, on top of that, we have added features like the automated investigation and remediation, Microsoft Threat Experts, and all of that, in case that's assuming you need a Microsoft incident response team to assist, and a whole lot of all of that. So if you think about this, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint generally is a very, very effective tool against malwares. Like I explained earlier, it's most times malwares are generally classified into two, which is we have the ransomwares and the wipers. The ransomwares being threat actors who require some form of financial obligation or whatever it is they may want from the business in exchange for releasing their files, or sponsored threat actors that are only interested in ensuring that your business is unable to make money. So what they do most times is they either delete files or they get your hard drives to crash by building in self-elimination modules or self-destructive modules. So it's generally within these two in most cases, ransomwares or wipers. So Microsoft Defender for Endpoints does a very, very effective job in determining this. I've personally deployed this across a lot of businesses in the past. So I can tell for a fact that this is the right tool to mitigate a lot of the risks attached to ransomwares and a lot of malwares. So we move forward. So that's effectively the end of the solutions, the discussions around the solutions, which we would want to expose you to. This slide speaks to the HSO offerings. So as HSO as a business, we are always happy to help customers build security policies that align with their business goals. Because when you think about building a security policy, not all security policies are applicable to every business. So the risks that apply to a business may be different, or in most cases are different to risks that apply to another business. So a thorough understanding of the business use cases is quite critical in determining building a security policy, and that's where we can help you as HSO. Secondly, we are happy to review digital footprints and cloud optimization engagements. We've done quite a lot of these in recent times. So we look at we basically start with an assessment of your posture as a business, and then we lay produce recommendations that help you get to where you would want to get to as a business. Next, we perform cloud security risk assessments and provide recommendations. This could be agentless. It depends on it's all dependent on the extent of the engagement, but we are happy to provide this. And generally, we provide security consultancy engagements across all clients. So thank you. That's all from me. Just hand over to Chris at this point.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Namdi. A lot to take in, a lot to follow, and clearly we've done a lot of these in a lot of depth. So if you've got any questions at all, you can pop them in the chat or ask us, or reach out to myself or Namdi, or indeed any of the marketing team or your account manager.